Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media. I am Dr. NIK NIKAM, and you're watching COVID 19 World News. This is October 18, 2020. In October 2020, are we dealing with the COVID 19 pandemic, or are we in a state of COVID 19 Casedemic? What in the world is Casedemic? Before I proceed, I would like you to take a look at my upcoming book, COVID 19 Pandemic 2019-2020, a personal guide on how to deal with pandemics, which will be on Amazon.com in November 2020. October 17th, there have been 39.73 million cases of COVID recognized all across the globe, which accounts for 1.11 million deaths. That's a substantial number of COVID cases and mortality related to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the month of January, February, March, and April, most of the countries went through the first wave of the COVID-19. This COVID-19 started in Wuhan, China in the later stages of January. Then it has spread to more than 200 countries. What is startling is this resurgence of a second wave all across Europe, Asia, and in America. The question is, are we dealing with worsening of a COVID-19 pandemic, or are we just panicking because we are in a state of COVID-19 Casedemic? Let's take a look at some of these charts which will highlight what I'm trying to talk about. Let's take the daily new cases in Japan. In the first wave, it had like 500 to 600 cases at the max. Its mortality was like 300 max per day, and it had a short course and went to the baseline. Now, during months of July and August, there was a sudden increase in the spike of new cases, reaching almost 1,500 cases, which is 3 times the number reached during March and April. But the mortality has remained flat to negligible numbers. What is creating this disparity, dichotomy between a second surge in number of cases with no corresponding increase in mortality? Are we dealing with a case of Casedemic? Now, this is France. They look tiny, but let me run you through this. During the peak, it had as much as 5,000 cases in March and April, but now it is registering 30,000 cases. That is 5 to 6 times, 600% increase in number of cases. But look at the mortality here. There's a huge dichotomy between increased number of cases and decreasing number of deaths related to COVID-19 pandemic. Is this COVID-19 pandemic phase, or is this COVID-19 Casedemic case? We see a similar story in Germany. Germany had 7,500 peak number of cases in March and April, and it has almost reached the same peak, but the mortality is nowhere close to what was seen in March and April, to a tune of 300 deaths per day. What is driving this increased number of cases with no change in death rates? What does that mean? Should the world leaders panic because they are experiencing more cases and there could be more deaths, which have not turned out to be? How should they deal with this changing paradigm? A shift in number of cases, how to address the overall situation across the globe. A similar case in the United Kingdom, which is going through terrible times. It went through terrible times in March and April when they were aiming for herd immunity. They had 5,000 cases with almost 1,000 deaths. That's 20% mortality. But look at here, now from 5,000 it has gone to 20,000. That is 400% increase in number of cases, but hardly any deaths compared to what they had in March and April. So are we dealing with a casedemic or a worsening pandemic? New York, as we know, New York was the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic in the month of March and April. They had 11,000 cases during the peak with a mortality almost 1,000, which is again equal to 10% mortality. But now we are seeing a slight surge. This is almost close to 2,000 cases in New York City now in October, but hardly any increase in the number of deaths. We are seeing a similar pattern in Asia, especially Japan, and in Europe, in majority of the countries in Europe, and also in many states in the United States. So the question is, how could we explain this dichotomy in increasing number of cases with no change in mortality or no increase in mortality? Let's explore some of the things that are happening and its implications on how world leaders should be dealing with this pandemic, or as we put it, COVID-19 Casedemic in the month of October 2020. Of course, we are doing more tests. We know that because we are seeing an astronomical increase in number of tests done all across the globe. In the United States, we have tested more than 30% of the population, which is a substantial number. So we are doing more tests, and as we do more tests, and as more tests become available, more people are going to get tested, even if they have symptoms or not. So we could literally be testing people with symptoms, mild symptoms, or no symptoms. So in this way, we are picking up more and more patients with negative tests, and more patients, of course, with positive tests. Talking about positive tests, the percentage of positive numbers in Texas went up from 3.5 to 21%. That was a real surge in active cases, which created the second spike in the month of July and August, with increased number of hospitalizations and increased mortality. But that's a totally different issue. If we are seeing 300, 400, 500% increase in the number of cases with no increase in mortality, then what difference does it make as how many people test positive? When we are talking about people testing positive, we need to understand the limitations of the test that we are using to look for an active coronavirus infection. The RT-PCR test that we are doing not only looks at live viruses, which are more important in terms of causing symptoms, making the patient sick, and also spread the virus to other people. The PCR tests can detect any remnants of a virus. Whether the virus is alive or dead, it doesn't matter. As long as it detects an RNA sequence of a virus which may be dead or non-functional, then it is going to make the test positive. So, is this the right test at this time to look for people with active infections who could become symptomatic or has a potential to spread the infection to others? Is there increased political pressure in some parts of the world to do more tests, more testing, more isolation, more contact identification, which is all fine, but do we have a test that really picks up people with real active infection? That is the key point that we need to keep in mind. So how do we really interpret this data? If there is no increase in mortality, the number of cases that we are detecting may not be a true reflection of the virulence of the COVID-19 virus in terms of causing massive disruption of life. And that needs to be taken into the context of the discussions as how we approach this casedemic situation. In the initial stages, when we have like 5, 10, 100 cases, testing is an important thing, because in the initial stages, probably everybody most likely have active infections and they are actively spreading infection to other people. So any test that can detect the virus or virus remnants would be useful in identifying these patients so that we can isolate these patients, quarantine them, and do the contact tracing. But after we go through the initial phase, the initial wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, And when the dust settles down, if we see a sudden rise in the number of cases, it could be related to too much disregard for self-mitigation guidelines, but we may be checking more people with less symptoms or no symptoms, and it may not be a true reflection of the COVID-19 pandemic burden as long as the death rates are low. This is an important lesson we need to keep in mind and not panic on top of a panic of a COVID-19 pandemic when we are perhaps in a state of COVID-19 casedemic in October 2020. So this is a summary of what I wanted to talk about, whether in October 2020, are we in a state of COVID-19 pandemic or are we in a state of COVID-19 casedemic, and how do we change our approach to dealing with this particular situation. In the meantime, take a look at my upcoming book on COVID-19 pandemic, a personal guide on how to survive a pandemic. It will be in Amazon in November. And you have been watching COVID-19 World News, October 18, 2020. COVID-19 pandemic, or are we in a COVID-19 casedemic phase of COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you so much for watching, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will see you next time.